Hello. Oh, good, you're still awake. So yeah, as the screen says, I'm a speaker, a writer, a consultant, and a futurist. So if nothing else, you can go back to your colleges and tell your students there is a new career available. You too can be a futurist. It is a genuine job, and people actually pay me to do it. What does it mean? It means I work with organizations around the world, some big companies, Barclays and HSBC, everything from booze to banking, I like to say, to help them to answer 3 questions. First of all, what does our future look like? And secondly, how do we tell that story? There's no point having a view of the future if you can't convince your staff, your students, your board, your stakeholders of what that future looks like. And thirdly, what on earth do we do about it? That's the tricky bit. It's great fun looking to the future. Sometimes it's really frivolous. I get called up and people ask me, all those things we saw in Back to the Future, are they realistic? Are they going to come true? And sometimes it's really, really serious. Working with organizations, local authorities who've just had a big shock and want to make sure that the next time a big shock comes along, they're ready for it. And I'm busy at the moment. It seems at the moment everyone wants to know about the future. And why is that? Well, you've heard a couple of times today. You heard from Eddie Obeng about this idea of accelerated change, that change is happening fast now. Can I do a quick poll, if I can see all of you up in the stands there? Who feels like change is happening faster now? That's the usual, about 90%. And it's a common theme. Lots of us feel like change is happening faster, like our heads are spinning. And it's true of you in colleges, it's true of the chief execs of companies, it's true of boards, it's true of people in the street. And so everyone's asking the question, what's next? What's coming? How can I see the future? And that's the question that I try and answer. But answering that question is really about understanding change. It's understanding what's coming. It's understanding what drives change, what's going to get us from here to there. Why are things changing faster now, if they really are? And I'm really excited to be here because, as I'll say towards the end of my presentation, I keep coming back to the same answer when people ask about change and what should we do about change. The answer almost invariably comes back to education. But first, we have to start explaining this idea, this feeling, this sense that we all have, and excuse me, I'm going to grab some water, that change is happening faster now. Because if you ask a historian, they'll poo-poo this idea. There's all these technologists, people like Ray Kurzweil, the chief futurist for Google, who tell this story of change getting faster and faster and faster. They point to things like Moore's Law. Are you familiar with Moore's Law? So 50-ish years ago, the co-founder of Intel noticed that the number of transistors you can economically fit on a silicon chip is doubling every 2 years. Or to you and I, the bang for buck we get out of a computer doubles every 2 years. In fact, so does the speed of connection we can get from a mobile device. So does the amount of storage we can get for £1. And these things have knock-on effects. They've transformed all sorts of industries, from retail to medicine. And they keep going on this exponential curve. Things keep getting faster and faster and faster. But you put this to the historians and they say, hold on a second. You think change is happening fast now? Go and look back at the Industrial Revolution. Go and look back at the shift from the horse and cart to the car. Go and look back at the advent of the washing machine. Think about the scale of impact of the washing machine and domestic automation. You rewind 5 generations, we used to spend an average of 63 hours a week on domestic labor. And when I say we, let's be clear, it's roughly 1/2 of the population who was doing most of that work. 63 hours a week. If you're doing 63 hours a week, there's no opportunity to come into the workforce. There's no leisure industry to be built up around you. That's far more than a full-time job. One of the first projects I did as a futurist about 5-6 years ago was with LG. And we looked at how that number has changed. We found that if you fast forward to the current generation, people spend somewhere between 2 and 18 hours a week on domestic labour. And that shift, that cutting by somewhere between a factor of 4 and 10 of the amount of time we spend on domestic labour, has had a dramatic impact on all of us. It's enabled the creation of this leisure industry, some of that hospitality that John was just talking about. It's released people into the workforce. It's played a direct role in women's liberation. This was a massive scale change, a huge order of magnitude change, but it took a long time. It started back in the 1920s in the US, in the 1950s in Europe. It took decades. And this is the sort of change we're used to. Whether it is industrial revolutions, whether it is the shift from the horse and cart to the car, large-scale change that transforms our cities, our lives, our relationships, shopping, culture, society, great big changes that happen over decades, what you might call low-frequency change. I believe what we're experiencing now is what I call high-frequency change. I don't believe that change overall is accelerating, and that the grand arc of history has somehow put its foot down and is moving faster. But I believe that thanks to new technologies, that accelerated communication, our shrunken world, our globalized markets, we're experiencing high-frequency change now. I like to think of all change as happening in waves. And what's disrupting our industries now, what's disrupting our markets, what's disrupting the companies that I work with, is high-frequency change. Smaller changes, ones that might only affect a single industry, a single company, but happen at an incredibly accelerated rate. I'll give you an example, starting with Justin Bieber. Might be an unusual place to start. But back in 2015, Justin Bieber was witnessed on Instagram rolling around his green room on a hoverboard. Anybody buy a hoverboard for their child, nephew, niece, themselves? You can admit it. March, April 2015, these things are huge, and they're $2,000 a pop. They're a celebrity toy. But within 3 months, you can pick one up on a market stall in Birmingham for £250. The Chinese manufacturers have ramped up. The importers have cottoned on. Volumes have increased. And people have started to build businesses around the hoverboard. Import businesses, serving businesses, servicing businesses, repair, retail. And then 3 months later, 2 things happen. Number one, the Department of Transport says, you do know you can't legally ride these anywhere. Unless you are landed gentry, it's kind of pointless having one. You can't ride it on the street, you can't ride it on the pavement, you can't ride it in a park. And then 2 of them explode and burn someone's house down. Never great for marketing. Instead of this long, decades-long change, we had this 6-month hype cycle, a whole industry, family-owned factories built up and collapsed in China in this 6 months. Retailers and servicing companies in the UK built up and collapsed in 6 months. Major retailers lost chunks of money when they started to invest in these things and demand collapse. Although it's a frivolous example, it's a good example of the nature of the change we're facing today. And that change has effects. It's that sort of change that my clients are mostly worried about. And it's that sort of change that you're going to be training people to deal with in the future. And it's that sort of change that drives statistics like this. This is 4 different forecasts of the effect of automation on jobs between now and 2030. Jobs that could be automated, handed over to machines, whether those jobs are physical roles like bricklaying, or whether they're cognitive roles like a legal assistant or a solicitor. Look at the most conservative number in this list. The most conservative estimate yet of the number of jobs that could disappear to automation over the next 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, somewhere in that range, is the OECD, and it's 14%. Now, there will be new jobs like futurist. But will there be enough new jobs to replace 14% of all work? Will it come? Will those new jobs come in time for 2030? The answer is we don't know, but it seems unlikely to me. We're facing a period of enormous disruption, of traditional roles disappearing, not just in manual work, but in a lot of cognitive work as well. And the industries know this. Professional services industries know this. The construction industry knows this. The finance industry knows this. We employ 1 million people in call centres alone in the UK, and I've seen technology that could replace 80% of them. These are huge waves of disruption coming at a very accelerated rate. And they're going to hit each industry at a different time. In many ways, each one is going to be a single wave that touches industries at different times based on different braking factors. Regulation, the capital cost of getting into those industries, human attitudes and culture. These things are very unpredictable in their effects at slowing these waves down. This presents a really interesting challenge to companies, because there's lots of research going on now about what does a company look like after we've done all this automation. We're all familiar with the classic pyramid, the hierarchy, chief exec, directors, managers, workers, smaller or larger, flatter or taller, ultimately a pyramid. What does that pyramid look like when you start to hand over a lot of the junior roles, particularly, to machines? The Boston Consulting Group has this idea of the rocket ship model. You take the traditional pyramid and you slice off the wings, because the wings are now handed over to machines. The wings are all robots now. Well, how does that work? You have a single pillar. Do you promote everybody all the way up based on time served? We don't have a good answer to that yet. But I think that's the conservative estimate of what could happen. I think it could look more like this. We could end up inverting the human pyramid of workers. A few junior people at the bottom, augmented by or maintaining machines. We've already seen robot bricklayers that allow one person to do the work of 3 people. Artificial intelligence assistants appearing in the professional service industries that completely strip away much of the manual work of moving paper around, of research, of discovery, of fact-checking, of accounting. How do we find these senior people doing the more human roles? Where do they come from? How do they get trained? How are they educated to be able to fulfill those positions? No one has a good answer to this yet, but education is definitely part of it. So we have 3 issues intersecting, 3 pressure points across our economy. This accelerated disruption, rising automation, and a complete uncertainty about what career paths are going to look like when increasingly human beings are augmented by machines in the workplace. And that's before we get into the macroeconomic environment. The B word. No need to say it. How do we address these things? Well, in this context specifically, I think it comes down to a few more specific questions. The question I get asked most often in any presentation, in any context: what do I teach my children for tomorrow's world? How can I create an education for my kids that is future-proof? And when do we teach it, and how do we teach it? And this is a question that was put to me originally by the Institute of Chartered Accountants a few years ago. And it was put appropriately for this context by employers. Employers wanting to feed back to the education market to say, these are the skills we think we will want in the future. And with a working group, we broke it down to a really simple thing we call the 3 C's. Tomorrow's employees, the human ones, will need to be able to do 3 things. Number 1, curate, discover and qualify information. Number 2, create, synthesize something new, the creation of value. Number 3, communicate, sell those ideas to their colleagues and their customers. Curate, create, communicate. If people have those skills, then in many ways the context in which they learn them, the knowledge within which those skills are built, is maybe not irrelevant but is ephemeral. They're going to be dealing with a world of high-frequency change where they're constantly having to relearn the detailed technical skills. But some core things, thrown back to some ideas that Andreas Schleicher talked about this morning, will be transferable. They will be enduring. And when are they going to learn it? It's not going to be all in one go. It's not going to be at the start of their working lives. If we're facing these waves of high-frequency change, then the things they need to know will not even have been discovered at the point they enter the workplace. And this is already reality today. One of the most important things people are having to learn is how to learn, when to recognize and how to recognize the gaps in their own knowledge and the barriers in their own career and go and find the answers to those problems. I agree with what Andrea said this morning. The degree is a barrier to lifelong learning. We need to accept that education is going to be a whole life enterprise. But I don't want to come at this totally from the position of what employers want from education. Education isn't just about what employers want. It isn't just about someone's economic value. In fact, it can't be now more than ever. Because even if that most conservative estimate of 14% of jobs being automated is right, and heaven forfend, the larger estimates of 47% are right, there will not be a possibility of full employment. We cannot predicate someone's value to society based on their earning potential. There's lots of conversations about universal basic income at the moment, about what are people going to do if they're not going to work. Conversations about 4-day week, very sensible conversations about 4-day week. What are people going to do when they're not working? I think the most valuable answer is learn. We need to go back to a valuing of learning as a strength, as a great thing in its own right, as a contribution to society in its own right, whether or not it has direct economic value. And particularly where that learning helps the rest of us to adapt to this high-frequency change. So I've got a few minutes for questions before I sum up. I've blitzed through all sorts of stuff there. Are there any questions from the audience at that point? Thank you for the likes. Stunned silence. Go on, give me one question. I know David was threatening to do one if you didn't. One at the back there, fantastic.
Thanks. Is there a generational conceit at work here?
Sorry, is there?
A generational conceit at work, that we always think our challenges are different and bigger. Because you harked us back to the Industrial Revolution and all the people who worked in the horse rearing and care business never possibly having any prospects of economic deployment, but they did.
I think you're absolutely right. I think every generation, just like as we all get older, we all think young people are doing terrible things now and sort of reject their ways as being somehow sort of disruptive and against the historical order. We all think our current generation is experiencing faster change and things doing differently, just like the Victorians thought their age was this age of ultimate sophistication. But I think there is something genuinely different now. As I say, I don't think we can argue. I don't think we can justify this idea that somehow history is moving more quickly now, that everything is changing faster. I think with the benefit of hindsight, we'll look back at the internet age, the age of the connected computer, as being a change of the same order of magnitude as the Industrial Revolution, but no greater. But I think what we have to acknowledge is that the hyper-connected nature of the world now, the fact that I can access 1,000 suppliers direct from China and have something on my doorstep in a parcel for £1, it does have a dramatic effect on our society. The fact that ideas, whether they are media, whether they are books, whether they are political, can spread across the globe at the speed of light. That does change things. I don't think it changes the grand speed of history, but I do think it gives us this phenomenon of high-frequency change, smaller but disruptive in specific spheres. That answer your question? Thank you. So, I'm on video. Can I get the last slide back? To summarize then, I think we have to accept that knowledge is increasingly ephemeral and that some skills will be transitory. They will only last so long, but there are core skills that we teach people in the context of learning knowledge that are durable and that will endure and that will give human beings a differentiation in an age of machines. The ability to curate, the ability to create, the ability to communicate. And I think we have to reinforce those skills repeatedly throughout life at every point where we help people to relearn the skills they need to progress their career. But we also have to remember that this is not just about earning potential. Not everyone will be earning all the time throughout their working lives anymore. And learning for its own sake has an enormous value and one we increasingly have to treasure in the future society. Thanks very much.